Hi everybody, welcome back to part 2 of how to make a tiny quilt. Now, if you enjoyed the first video and you're enjoying what you're seeing here, I would encourage you to go ahead and click subscribe so you make sure you get everything that comes your way to this channel. But a question that people had, and I really appreciate your comments and your questions, but a question that people had from the first part of the video was, well, I just made a quilt, but we didn't actually quilt it. And so that's a very valid point. I don't often quilt my tiny quilts. They're so small that they tend to, if you close off the edges, to lay pretty flat. So here's an example of one I didn't quilt. Here's another one I didn't quilt. And you see it's hanging in there. But why not practice quilting? You know, sometimes I do quilt my tiny quilts. And so here you can see a couple of examples. Here's one with really tiny stitches. Here's one with kind of fatter, longer stitches. So depending on how you want to quilt this, I'm going to show you a couple different ways. The first way is more similar to what we made in the first part of the video, in which you have just kind of a pouch of a quilt, right? The second one is going to be where you have what we call a quilt sandwich, and all 4 edges are still open, and then we're going to bind it. Okay, so first things first, we'll start with what you've already made from the first bit. Now, I'm going to use some chunky black thread just so you can see it nice and easy, although it is pretty cute. I've got a knot in one end, hopefully it is somewhere in there. And I'm just going to sneak in here onto this edge down here that I sealed off and then come up somewhere close. That's going to hide that knot on the inside of my quilt, and that little thread there I can always snip off. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, a little tug, and that should disappear. Okay, now to quilt this up, I'm just going to quilt edge to edge. And I'm just going to get a little bit on the top and a little bit on the bottom. I'm going to go in and out. With a quilt this small, you can really start anywhere in the quilt that you want to. If you're working on a larger hand-sewn piece, you'll probably want to start in the middle and work your way out to the edges. That's just because sometimes with larger projects, there's some bulk that happens, but we don't need to worry about that with such a small piece. You'll see I'm not being too careful about making sure all my stitches are identical, though you are welcome to do that if that's your style. Okay. I'm getting several stitches on one needle just to make it go a little bit quicker. I mean, for not trying to get even stitches, those are pretty good, aren't they? If you want, it can be really helpful to have a thimble. I wear mine on my middle finger. Some people wear it on their ring finger. This one I find for me is the most comfortable. I believe it's a clover, but don't quote me on that. And the thimble is not to protect your other hand from getting poked. It's really to give you that force to push with. And so that can be really helpful for you. When you get to the end, we're going to do something called cheating the thread, right? So we don't have to tie this stitch off, this seam off. We can just run the needle inside the pouch. See that? It's not coming through the backside. And then we'll start again. Sometimes the top of a row, I like to do a back stitch. Remember how we talked about that? That just secures it a little bit. That's up to you though. Now in this example, I'm just giving you straight parallel rows up and down, but you feel free to do whatever kind of pattern you want. Maybe you want to do diagonals. Maybe you want to do kind of curlicue free forms. You know, you do whatever you want. Maybe you want to do a mix, right? Maybe you want to, for example, if I were quilting this piece, maybe you want to do some lines long because these shapes are really long, but then here do horizontals. You can do all kinds of stuff. Okay, now I'm just going to finish this stitch, get it to the bottom so I can show you how I would wrap this up. We don't need to sit here and quilt this whole thing together. We got other things to do, don't we? Okay, so again, love my thimble for pushing through that needle. Not required, but if you're doing any amount of hand quilting, you know that's more than a 5 or 10 minute project, you'll be thankful that you have a thimble. Because those repetitive movements really do add up. And we want to keep our hands nice and healthy. They're our best instruments. Okay, so let's just pretend I've quilted the whole thing. I'm ready to tie off. What I would do is just another back stitch here. Not the same size as all my other stitches, see that? And because it's a tiny quilt, we don't need to be super concerned about a very secure tile. I'm just going to do 2 back stitches on top of each other. See that? You can tell that stitch is just a little bit chunkier than the others. Then run the needle into the pouch, out the side, and snip. Okay. So this is how you would do it if you made kind of a pouch style tiny quilt like I showed you in the other video. Now, let's put this aside. We're going to talk about a quilt with binding. Now, this is good if you're thinking about making a larger project where you will have binding, right? When it comes to tiny quilts, I do things kind of backwards from a traditional larger project. With a larger quilt, you would quilt everything first and then you'd bind it. But with something this size, I find it actually helps to bind it first. It holds everything down and then you can quilt the center. But do it whatever way you want. Doesn't matter to me. One advantage of leaving it open is it makes it really easy to get your thread in there. So I think for the sake of the video, work in here together. That's what we'll do. But experiment and see what feels good to you, okay? This is just, if you're wondering, some crochet cotton. Pretty readily available stuff. I'm not sure what size it is. It might be a size 10. But I love pearl cotton. But sometimes that can be hard to track down. And so much of the time I find myself just working with black and white, which are easy colors to find. Okay, thanks for sticking with me as I thread this needle. Oh. This ever happened to you? Mm-hmm. I say with a needle in my mouth. If this doesn't work on this try, I'll show you a little trick that I use sometimes. Okay, I'll show you my trick. Da-da-da. Take a candle. Sometimes I have a little hunk of beeswax. I won't see that here, but it doesn't have to be beeswax. This good old paraffin works too. And you just kind of run the tip of it through a couple times. And that consolidates all those little tiny threads, strengthens this thread a bit so that it goes through the eye of the hole a little bit neater. See that? Just like that. Okay, pop a little knot there on the end. And then with the sides open, it's essentially the same idea. I'm going to hide the knot on the inside. Start in the middle, start on the sides. For this project, it doesn't really matter so much. Okay. You'll notice that I've already got my 3 layers pinned together with safety pins. I love these safety pins. They're meant especially for quilting. You'll see they have a little curve to them. That helps you when you're pinning a project together to kind of scoop up the layers. I'll just pin these together so that I don't have to fuss with them as I'm quilting. And just like last time, we're going to go in and out. In and out. A little bit on the top, a little bit on the bottom. And you can do whatever you want. Like here, look, I'm just going to change my mind and go a different direction. Because why not? We're just making all this stuff up as we go anyway. Lesson to live. And so then I would go, maybe one more stitch, get us a little closer to the edge here. All right. Then I'm going to cheat the thread again. Remember cheating, we just kind of run it through the top couple layers. You could probably, well, no, it's so well hidden. The needle's in there somewhere. Okay. And that allows you to start a new row. Again, I might do a little back stitch. Because what that does is it kind of anchors the top of the thread. If I don't do it, watch what can happen sometimes. I'm going to take this pin out. Okay. Again, you know, put 7 stitches on that needle and really get the thing quilted up. Okay, now if you're not careful and you don't do that back stitch at the top of your row, sometimes what happens is it tends to accordion like that. Is that the worst thing in the world? Obviously not. But you can prevent it just by doing a little back stitch. Okay, I'm going to do one more row, back stitch, and then we're going to bind this partially quilted quilt. And just like I showed you before, when I get to the end of the thread, when I'm all quilted up, we'll just pretend, I'm going to do 2 back stitches right on top of each other. If this were a larger project and security of the stitch was really important to me, I might do 3 back stitches. Okay. So I've run the needle out through the middle of the quilt. And here we go. We're just going to pretend this is quilt 2. Yeah, what's next? When I trim the backing fabric for a tiny quilt, you can see I usually do like a little pinky's width. I like a thinner border on my tiny quilts just to keep things proportional. This shows you what a pinky width folded over binding is going to look like, right? With a larger project, I would do like a chunkier fingers, maybe this one, right? Now, it can be really helpful here to have a different kind of pin. These are called applique pins. They're about 1/2 inch or a little over 1 centimeter. And they're just the perfect size for this kind of project. Because when you use larger straight pins, which you could for this project, sometimes it's just the thread tends to get caught on them, and that gets to be annoying, doesn't it? Okay, so we got our applique pins handy. We've got our backing trimmed. We've got it all quilted up. I'm going to fold it down once so the raw edge of the backing lines up with the quilt top and the batting, and then I'm going to fold the backing over the quilt top and the batting, and here's where our pins come in handy. I'm just do one right there, maybe one more down here. Okay, give you a closer look there. Okay, just like that. Love that knot. Just like with quilting, I'm going to hide my knot on the inside. And now we're going to do, well, you could do a variety of stitches to get this down. I usually do a whip stitch. And a whip stitch is just you take a little bite out of the binding on top and then a longer stitch on the back. So you just see a smidge. I like seeing a smidge. If you don't, I'm going to show you another stitch here in a second you can use. So this is the whip stitch. And I'll show you what it looks like on the back too. Okay, whip stitch gives you these cute little bites into the binding, and they're a little bit longer on back. You could cheat the thread through the quilt so you don't even see these stitches if you want, but I like how it brings everything together. Another stitch that sometimes I use when I want, we'll say, invisible attaching of the binding, right? Maybe I don't want to see these little bites. The ladder stitch, I'm going to run the needle right along the edge of that fold. Can you see that? Just like that. Okay. Pull it through. And then right where that thread came out, I'm going to go into the quilt top. So where it comes out of the binding, I'm going to go directly below into the quilt top and take a similar size stitch. Okay, again, right where this comes out of the quilt top, now I'm going to go up to the binding, take a little bite. I'm going to run my needle just along the inside of that fold, pull it through. I'm going to go straight down now for the next stitch, into the batting, and pull that down. And when I pull that down, you can see with this ladder stitch, did I tell you all that's what this is called? With a ladder stitch, these little stitches can almost disappear, especially if you're not using a chunky black thread that is hard to disguise. Okay, so I'm going to keep along. Oh, and I'll also point out that when I did the ladder stitch here, I chose to cheat the thread so the stitches are hidden in the back. You could do the same thing up here if you wanted to, right? You could just as easily go all the way through. So see, so I'm going to cheat it through the binding, but when I come down here, I could go all the way through, creating that stitch if I wanted it. You got choices. Okay, so I'm just going to whip stitch this down. Thank you, pen. I'm going to whip stitch this down to the corner so I can show you how I do that. And then I'm going to leave you on your own to finish up. I think you got this. Excuse me. Ooh. It ain't easy to sew and talk and have a camera at the same time. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so we have come all the way down to the corner and it's time to turn the corner. What do we do? All right, I usually kind of stick my needle in my quilt somewhere. Sometimes I'll tack down that thread just to keep it out of the way. Optional step. Same as before, nothing really special here. We're going to fold that raw edge down so that it meets the raw edge of the quilt top. One fold, and then we fold the whole thing over onto the quilt top. We're going to secure it with our applique pins. Make sure one goes here in the corner because there's a little bit of bulk there that you could trim out if you wanted to. But that pin will help keep that bulk down. And again, I think 2 pins will be just fine. And we're ready to begin again. One thing I would do here on the corner is, hi, I'm back. One thing I would do here on the corner is I always like to do a stitch on the outside of the binding just to keep that corner nice and neat. Okay, so what that looks like, or what it can look like, is something like this. I'm gonna go on the outside of that stitch, and then I'm gonna come up somewhere here in the middle of the binding to get that part down. Okay, wow, all these little threads. Okay, first things first, you can see I did a little stitch here on the edge. That just holds the outside down. Now, let's start here. I really do like the whip stitch. That's what I use more times than not. More times than the ladder stitch I showed you. Ooh, I got one more I can show you here in a second. Okay, and here we just carry on. Just like we would whip stitching, ladder stitching, whatever your favorite stitching is. Okay, that's cute, isn't it? Now, here's one more that's real cute. Now, my friend Heidi Parks likes to do this one. She'll do just a simple running stitch right along the edge. So watch what I'm doing. Running stitch, remember, is just the same thing as the quilting. And so she'll get as close as she can to that folded edge of the binding. Hold on a second now. Make sure you're focused. She'll get as close as she can to the folded edge of that binding. You see how I'm doing that? Take a little bite. And come back up. Now let's see what this looks like, because maybe you want to try this too. Okay. See, that can be a really nice effect. Let's just finish out this side looking like that. It honestly just depends on what's catching your eye. What do you like? That's all you got to think about. Each one of these is just as strong as the other. That might not be 100% true. I think the strongest would be the ladder, because you're running that thread all the way through, like that whole length of the stitch. And the running stitch, I think those are the two strongest. The whip stitch, because you're only getting a little piece of this top, might tend to be a little bit less durable. But I've never noticed it to bother me in any way whatsoever. Okay, so again, we are going to tackle this corner together. We're going to fold the raw edge down to the edge of the quilt top, one fold, and then fold it again. I'm going to poke a little pin right there. Get that a little bit neater. Okay, then here we go. I'm going to come out here, flip, get back on the camera, Zach. I'm going to come back out here. And do my stitch on the outside, just kind of hold all those layers down. Ben, thank you for your service. I'm going to stitch all those layers down. And I'm going to come up right at the edge of the binding. You can see that there, right at the edge of the binding. And begin again. I'll give you a little more running stitch so y'all can see what that can look like. Once you get good, you can get several stitches on that needle, and you'll be cranking out these tiny quilts. Okay. So now you can see how the corner might look. Isn't that sweet? Okay, I'm going to go finish up this quilt. You finish up your quilt, and then make sure to share it with me. Now, if you finish this and you want to share it with me on Instagram, make sure to tag me there. You can always email me too. I like that as well. All right. Happy quilting. And if you have any questions, you know I'd love to hear from you. Just comment in the comments below.